We've talked about branching and looping, if statements, while loops, for loops, etc. And we did go through a little hands-on example of using them. But I'd like to build that up a little bit more because these are so important. And frankly, they're a little bit hard to understand sometimes because there's quite a bit of logic that you have to go through in your mind, and getting your mind kind of programmed, so to speak, to be able to think through that logic can be a little bit of a trick. And so what we're going to be doing in this lecture is building a guessing game. You ever played the game where somebody guesses a number and then you throw out a number and they tell you if it's too high or too low, and hopefully you finally get to the point where you guess the number? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. And here are some requirements for our game. We always want to start with requirements. So we're going to have the computer pick a random number between 1 and 100. Then we're going to continually ask the user to guess a number. Each time they guess, we're going to provide whether it's too high or too low, and we're going to continue that until they've guessed the answer correctly. So we're going to start by doing this in Scratch, and then we're going to move to doing it in Java. You'll be able to see both examples. This is going to be fun. Let's create that guessing game here in Scratch. So the first thing that we're going to need is that random number. And we're going to need to store that random number in a variable. So let's start by creating a variable. We're going to call it, how about correct number? Since it will be the correct number. And then let's set it, correct number, equal to, and here under operators, we can pick a random number between 1, of course, according to our requirements, 1 and 100. So that gives us our random number that we can start with. Of course, we want to start with a when clicked. Now, we're going to create a loop. And this loop is going to continue to go until the answer, or the correct number, equals the guessed number. So that's another variable that we're going to need. Let's call it guessed number. And let's set it equal to 0 here to start with. And then what we can do is we can repeat until the correct number equals the guessed number. All right. Now, within side of our loop, we need to check, because we said that we would tell the user, well, they have to ask first, don't they? So in here, we're going to have them, we're going to ask them, what is your guess? And then we're going to set the value of the guessed number equal to the answer that comes from that question. So the fact is that this loop is going to go in we're going to start this loop every time, right? That's why, unless, of course, under the circumstance that the correct number ended up being a 0, but it's going to be between 1 and 100, so that won't ever happen. Okay, so if the correct number is less than the guessed number, then we need to say, if it's lower, that means we need to say something like too high. Pick a lower number. Okay. If it's not too low, then, now here we're going to need to nest another if statement in here. Okay. And here we'll go the other direction and say, if the correct number is greater than the guessed number, we're going to say too low, pick a higher number. And then the other one here, so if it's not too high and it's not too low, we're going to say perfect, great guess. And we're done. That wasn't too hard, was it? So let's run this thing and see what happens. So we can tell over here that our correct number is a 78. Well, we shouldn't have known that, right? Let's start with a 50. And it should tell us that our guess was too low. We need to pick higher. And then it came back again and it asked us again. 75. Let's split the difference. Still too low. What's your guess? Well, let's get it to go the other direction. I'm going to say 80. Too high. Pick a lower number. All right, well, we know the answer is 78, so let's hit 78. Perfect. Great guess. And the program finishes. Wow, that was quick. There wasn't too much to it, was there? All right, that was great. All right, well, that wasn't too bad in Scratch. Now let's see what it looks like in Java. So, here we are in Java, creating that guessing game. So, in some of our past exercises, we've not been using object-oriented principles because the solution was very simple. Well, this is a pretty simple solution too, but I'm still going to use object-oriented principles with it. What that suggests then is that we're going to have a class that's kind of a working class that takes care of the random number stuff, and it's going to know what the random number is. So when we send it the guess, it's going to tell us if it's too high or too low. And then the other class is going to get input from the user, and it's going to display the results. So the first class that we're going to create, we're going to call guess. And the first thing that guess is going to have is a member function called correct answer. Just like what we had in Scratch. And I guess we call it correct number there, so let's just do the same thing. Then the next thing is we're going to use a constructor to actually set that value. That way, each time that we instantiate guess, it's going to regenerate the random number. So we'll start with public and guess. I'm not going to take any parameters right now, but what we're going to do is we're going to set correct number equal to a random number. So in Java, there is a class, and we're going to import it here. It's in the Java util class called random that generates random numbers. So before we set this, we're going to instantiate this. We'll call it rand, our object. Okay. Now rand has a method called nextInt. And what we do is within nextInt, we're going to put 99 in there, and it's going to give us a number between 0 and 99. Now, our requirements are a number between 1 and 100. So we'll just add 1 to whatever it gives us back, and that'll give us that range. And so we've got our random number generated. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a method that when the guessed number is passed into it, it will return a value that will help us to know if the guessed number is too low or too high, or if it matches. Now, the simplest way to do that is to simply use an integer for that returning number. So what happens is if let's say that the guessed number is 25 and we guess 50, we're too low, or I'm sorry, we're too high. So we would return from our method a response of 1. If the guess was 25, if the random number was 25 and our guess was 15, then we're too low. And in that case, we would respond with a number of -1 to indicate it was too low. And then if we match, or if we guess the right number, then we'll return with a 0. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to create a public method that returns an integer, again, a -1, +1, or a 0. Let's call it check guess. It's going to take an int as the guess. And so within here, we're just going to have a set of if statements. So if correct number is less than the guess, for correct number, gotta spell it right. If the correct number is less than the guess, that means the guess is too high, so let's return a 1. Else, if correct number is greater than guess, we're going to return a -1 because it's too low. Else, we're going to return a 0. So again, a -1, a +1, or a 0 is what's going to be returned from this class. All right, now let's work on the class we're going to call it guessing game. Okay. So the first thing that guessing game, this is gonna have a public static void main. And within here, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna instantiate our class. So the new one we just created, guess. We're gonna use guess lowercase. Again, these are two different things because of the case. Case matters in Java. Okay. So the other thing that we're going to need, just like we had in our Scratch program, is this variable called guessed number. We're going to set it equal to 0 right off the bat. And we're going to create a while loop, just like we used that repeat until loop in Scratch. While, and we're going to go back to that check guess. We're going to call it, and we're going to pass it guessed number. Now again, the first time around, we know that it's not going to work. Did I spell it wrong? While guessed number is not equal to 0, we're going to continue to loop, right? Because we know 0 means that they got the right result. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we've got to ask the user for their input. So up here under guess, I'm going to also instantiate scanner again, like we've done many times, in the same way. In. All right, so down here, we're going to say guess number equals input. Oh, I'm going to put my import in here. It's telling me, it was telling me. Util. Okay. Is it like that? Guess I gotta type it right. Okay, there we go. So input, next int, it's gonna get us an int. Now, of course, we also need to ask the question, which is, what is your guess? Trying to stay pretty consistent with the Scratch version. Okay, now we're going to say if guess, check guess, guess number is less than 1 or less than 0, too low, right? If it's too low, pick a higher number. Else, if is greater than 0, too high, pick a lower number. And last but not least, oops, else perfect, great guess. Okay. So the use of the object simplified to some extent this part of the program because all of that's happening over here in this other class. Then that's its purpose. So let's run it and let's see what we get. What's your guess? I'm going to say 50. Too low. Okay. 75. Too high. 60. Too high. 55. Too high. 52. 51. There we go. The number was 51. So there's an example of how you can use Java to create the guessing game.